I am standing across a mahogany table in a lawyer's office on a Tuesday morning in April, watching my husband of 14 years straighten his tie. His hand is steady. His jaw is set. He looks the way he always looks when he believes he is the most important person in the room, composed, certain, untouchable. And I am placing a printed transcript on that table, and a stack of financial records going back to 2018, and an affidavit from his own firm's HR department, and I am watching the color leave his face the way water drains from a bathtub. Slowly, then, all at once. He looks at me. For the first time in 14 years, I am not the one who seems irrational. But that morning is not where this story begins. This story begins on a Tuesday in spring when the air in Charlotte, North Carolina carries the smell of cut grass and something just opening up, and I am standing in the checkout line at the grocery store wearing my golden mustard sweater, the one that always reminds me of October even when the calendar says April. And through the plate glass window of the restaurant across the street, I see my husband seated at a corner table, white tablecloth, 2 glasses of water, his secretary sitting across from him with her hands folded over his. Let me be clear. I did not make this up. I did not misread it. I am not the kind of woman who sees things that aren't there, no matter what Marcus spent 14 years convincing me to believe about myself. I'm a 41-year-old woman with functioning eyes and a functioning mind, and what I saw through that window was exactly what it appeared to be. I set my basket down. I told the woman behind me to go ahead. I crossed the street and walked into that restaurant and went straight to the restroom and stood at that sink and counted to 60, 3 times. I ran cold water over my wrists the way my grandmother taught me when I was a girl and the world felt too large and too loud. I dried my hands on a paper towel. I smoothed the front of my golden mustard sweater, and I walked back out. His hand was still in hers. He did not pull away. He did not notice me for a full 4 seconds. And in those 4 seconds, I understood something that would take me weeks to fully absorb. He was not afraid of being caught. That is not the behavior of a man who fears consequences. That is the behavior of a man who has decided consequences do not apply to him. I turned around and walked out. Charlotte in spring has this quality that I have always loved. The older homes near downtown seem to exhale after winter, the azaleas coming up along the brick walkways, the neighborhood alive with the sound of screen doors, and children released from jackets, and people sitting on front steps again. I walked those 6 blocks home through all of it, and I did not cry. I climbed the stairs to our 3rd-floor apartment, the one with the window that looks down over the street, and I stood at that window for a long time and looked at the neighborhood the way you look at something you are memorizing. The tin box was in the closet, behind my winter coats, exactly where I left it. I had been folding bills in there since 2019. 20s mostly, sometimes a 50. Whatever I could set aside from grocery money without Marcus noticing. $680 in a tin box that used to hold Christmas cookies from my mother's church. I had never once thought of it as a survival fund. I thought of it as mine. That distinction would matter more than I knew. I went to the kitchen. My hands knew what to do even when my mind had gone somewhere else entirely. I pulled out the bananas, the vanilla wafers, the cream cheese, the condensed milk. I started layering banana pudding in a glass bowl the way my mother had taught me, methodical and slow, and the smell of it, sweet and plain and honest, was the first thing that had felt real in hours. Marcus came home at 7. He kissed me on the cheek. He said dinner smelled good. He sat at the kitchen table and talked about a conference call that had run long, a client in Atlanta who was being difficult, a property deal that was close to closing. His voice was warm and familiar and completely ordinary, and I sat across from him and said yes in the right places, and I watched his hands, those same hands, cut his food. I did not say anything about the restaurant, not yet, because something had shifted in me, standing at that window. Something had moved the way a heavy piece of furniture moves when you realize for the first time it is on wheels. I had spent 14 years making myself smaller to fit the shape of Marcus's certainty. That evening, quietly, without fanfare, I began to stop. The tin box was still in the closet. The money was still in there. And I was still in that apartment, on the 3rd floor, with a view of the street, watching something I had always refused to name slowly come into focus. I should have been afraid. What I felt instead was something much more useful. I felt clear. It did not start with the restaurant window. That is what I need you to understand. The restaurant window was just the moment the light finally came through, the specific crack in the wall where years of pressure had been building. Before that Tuesday in April, there had been years of smaller Tuesdays, smaller moments, smaller erasures, each one so minor that I had talked myself out of every single one. That is how it works. I know that now. I did not know it then. I want to take you back to the beginning. Not the very beginning, not our first apartment in Noda, before Marcus's income climbed and then climbed again, but the beginning of the feeling that I was slightly off, that my perception of events was just a degree or two tilted from reality, the way a picture hangs crooked on a wall and you keep straightening it and it keeps sliding back. I would mention something, a tone he had used, a comment that landed wrong, and Marcus would look at me with this particular expression, patient, gentle, the expression of a man explaining something to someone who almost understands. That's not what I said, sweetheart. That's not what happened. You do this, you know. You build things up. And I believed him. That is the part that is hardest to say out loud, even now. I believed him because I had already been taught to believe him, because I had grown up in a household where the loudest voice set the terms of reality, and Marcus was never loud. He was quiet and certain, and I had confused certainty with accuracy for so long that by the time I was 35, I was checking my own memories for errors before I trusted them. You know what I'm talking about. If you've ever replayed a conversation 3 times wondering if you said it wrong, if you've ever apologized for something you knew wasn't your fault just to make the air breathable again, you know exactly what I mean. I see you. And I want you to keep listening. My hobby, before the years started folding into each other, was my afternoon soap operas. 3 o'clock every weekday, the television on, my feet up on the coffee table, a glass of something cold, no interruptions. It sounds small. It was mine. Marcus started making comments about it so gradually that I barely noticed the erosion. A sigh when he came home and found me watching. A joke at dinner with neighbors about the woman glued to her stories. Then suggestions. Wouldn't that time be better used for something productive? Then the cable package adjusted without asking me. My channels reduced. The recording function disabled for the programs I liked. Every step alone was nothing. Together they added up to a woman who no longer sat on her own couch in her own home and watched something she loved without guilt. I gave up things I have not fully named yet. My sister, Diane, lives in Greensboro, an hour's drive, which Marcus always found a reason to make complicated. Holiday plans restructured. Phone calls that happened in the bathroom with the door closed because somehow my conversations with Diane always seemed to put Marcus in a mood. I did not call this isolation. I called it managing the household. I called it keeping the peace. I forgave endlessly because I had decided somewhere along the way that an unbroken yes was the highest form of love. It was not love, it was the absence of boundaries. And the absence of boundaries is not generosity. It is a door left open in every room. On the nights he worked late, which by 2022 had become 3 or 4 nights a week, I would make dinner and wait. Sometimes I made the banana pudding because the layering of it, the patience required, the way it had to set before it was ready, gave me something to do with my hands and my attention. I lit the candles on my small altar in the corner, the prayer cards arranged the way my grandmother had shown me, and I asked for patience and grace, and the wisdom to know when I was wrong. I asked God to help me be a better wife. I genuinely believed the problem was mine to fix. That is the cost of 14 years of self-doubt. You stop asking what he is doing wrong and spend all your energy auditing yourself. There were clues before the restaurant window. Of course there were. A name, Cassandra, that appeared in his conversations too often, always framed professionally, always contextualized as work. A $4.200 raise he had approved for his secretary last October that I didn't discover until I found the tax forms the following February. When I mentioned it, calmly, I was calm, he said he had told me. He was certain he had told me. He remembered telling me. He looked at me with that patient expression and said, "You really don't remember, do you?" And I sat with that question for 3 days, wondering if I had simply not retained it, wondering if I was losing pieces of my own life without realizing. That is the particular cruelty of this kind of betrayal. It doesn't leave bruises you can photograph. It leaves a woman standing in her own kitchen, questioning whether her mind can be trusted. What I didn't know was that while I was questioning my mind, Marcus was building a version of me in the minds of everyone around us. To his co-workers, I was unstable. To our neighbors, I was difficult and demanding. To my own sister, he had been quietly, over years, narrating a woman I would not have recognized, jealous, controlling, bad with money. He had been conducting a campaign of character assassination so slowly and so patiently that by the time I discovered any of it, the reputation was already set in its mold. But I didn't know that yet. What I knew was the feeling of being wrong in a room where I had not done anything wrong. What I knew was the smell of banana pudding and the quiet of a third-floor apartment and a tin box in the closet that held $680 that no one knew about. Small things. But mine. There is a particular moment, and I can tell you almost exactly when it happens, when a woman stops crying and starts thinking. It is not dramatic. It does not arrive with music or lightning or a sudden clarity that announces itself. It arrives the way dawn arrives in March in Charlotte, quietly, at the edges, almost imperceptible, and then all at once you realize you can see everything. For me, that moment arrived on a Thursday in March at 11:18 p.m. Marcus was in the shower. His phone was on the nightstand, screen down, which it always was. I had stopped noticing that detail the way you stop noticing a crooked painting when it has been crooked long enough. The phone buzzed, not a buzz that meant a call, a short vibration that meant a voice memo had been delivered. The screen lit up. I could see my own name in the notification. He had sent it to me by accident. I picked up the phone. I pressed play. 47 seconds of audio. His voice, warm, relaxed, intimate in the way that voices are intimate when they believe no one else is listening. "She still doesn't know anything," he said. "She never does." And then a low sound, comfortable, the sound of a man confident in his own invisibility. Then the message ended. I played it again. I played it 4 times. Each time I pressed play, I understood one more layer of what I was hearing, not just the words, but the ease of them, the carelessness. He had been so certain of my ignorance that he had become sloppy. That sloppiness was the first real gift he ever gave me. I set the phone back on the nightstand, screen down, exactly as it had been. I sat on the edge of the bed. The room smelled like his shower, that specific cedar soap he used, and I sat in that smell and did the math. And here is where the tin box comes back. I had been in that closet hundreds of times, my hand reaching past the winter coats for that small rectangle of painted tin with the faded Christmas pattern on the lid. For 7 years, slipping bills inside, it had felt like keeping a secret from the world. Sitting on the edge of that bed at 11:18 p.m. on a Thursday in March, I realized for the first time that the secret had been keeping me. $680. That was what I had managed to fold away while also being told, not in words, but in every structure of our life, that I had no financial authority. Marcus handled the accounts. Marcus made the decisions. My access was an allowance dressed up as partnership. And I had accepted this because I had accepted his version of reality for so long that I had stopped generating my own. That night, after the shower, after he kissed me on the forehead and said goodnight, and fell asleep with a confidence that now made my teeth ache, I lay still in the dark and began to count. Not the money in the box, everything, 14 years, every time I said yes when my body had said no. The promotion I didn't take in 2020 because Marcus said it would disrupt the household schedule, a disruption he had never been asked to consider for his own career, not once. The $12,000 I pulled from my mother's savings account in 2021 to cover a business shortfall he described as temporary, which I later understood to be the third such shortfall in 4 years. The Saturday mornings I stopped going to church with Diane because Marcus always seemed to need something on Saturday mornings. The friends who had slowly stopped calling because I had slowly stopped being available. The collapse happened the way he always said things happened with me, gradually, then all at once. But this time it was not hysteria. This time it was arithmetic. I counted what I had given. I tried to count what I had received in return. The numbers did not balance. They had never balanced. And the woman who had spent 14 years suspecting her own math understood suddenly that the calculation had always been correct. She had simply been taught to distrust her own results. I got up. I went to the corner where my small altar sat, the candles unlit at this hour, the prayer cards slightly faded, the particular piece of that small space that had always felt like the one corner of the apartment that was entirely mine. I lit one candle. I did not ask for patience this time. I asked for clarity. For the first time in a very long time, what I received was not comfort, but direction. The next morning I started collecting, not dramatically, not in a way anyone watching would have recognized as investigation. I went to the grocery store, I made banana pudding, I watched my soap operas, and in the time between those ordinary activities, I started looking. I went through the tax documents I had always been asked to sign but never encouraged to read. I found 3 accounts I had not known existed. I found the details of his secretary's raise, $4, $200 in October, $1, $800 the February before that, a pattern going back 18 months. I printed nothing yet. I noted everything. The tin box in the closet. Now when I opened the closet and looked at it, the comfort it had always carried was gone. What I felt instead was the weight of what it represented. A woman who had been reduced to hiding $20 bills behind her winter coats like a tenant in her own home. It made me furious, not at myself, not anymore. The fury was directed correctly for the first time in years. I knew the truth now. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. Enough to stop asking whether I had misread something. Enough to stop suspecting my own eyes. The hand had been exactly where I saw it. The voice on that recording had been exactly as clear as I heard it. And the woman in that apartment, on the 3rd floor, with a view of the street and a candle lit at midnight, was not irrational. She was not difficult. She was not bad with money. She was paying very close attention. The full picture did not arrive in a single revelation. It arrived the way damage reveals itself in an old house. Once you start looking, you find it behind every wall. The Cassandra details I already had. The voice memo, the hidden accounts, the raise pattern. But it was the paper that came from his firm's HR department, misdirected to our home address on a Friday in late March because someone in records had our old mailing address on file and had not updated it, that turned everything from a private wound into documented evidence. I held that envelope in my hands for a full minute before I opened it. Plain white envelope. His firm's return address in the corner, his name printed on the front, delivered to a house where his name was on a lease I had helped pay for 14 years. I opened it. I read it twice. And I understood that the story Marcus had been telling everyone about me, unstable, difficult, controlling, was the same story he had been telling at work, about a different woman, to cover a different set of behaviors. Cassandra was not just his secretary, she was his supervisor's niece, and there was a record. Not just what I had found on my own, but an institutional record. I need you to sit with that for a second. If you have ever been told that no one will believe you, that you have no proof, that your word against his is no contest, I need you to hear this. Sometimes the proof finds you. I did not celebrate. I sat at my kitchen table with that envelope and a cup of coffee, and I let myself feel the full weight of it. Not satisfaction, not yet. Something more sober. The kind of feeling you have when you find out that something bad you feared was real was, in fact, real. There is no triumph in that. There is only the steadying that comes from having your perception confirmed at last. Then I made a phone call. Her name was Renee, and she worked at a legal aid clinic 2 miles from my apartment in Charlotte. I had found the number on a pamphlet at the library 6 weeks earlier, tucked it into my purse without fully articulating why, and carried it there through the rest of winter. I called her on a Friday afternoon, sitting at my kitchen table, the envelope and my notes spread out in front of me. She answered on the second ring. I told her I needed to understand my options. I told her I had documentation. I told her I had 14 years. She said, "Tell me what you have." So I told her. I told her about the voice memo, the tax records, the hidden accounts, the $12.00 from my mother's savings, the raise history, the HR envelope, the name Cassandra. I told her all of it, organized and clear, without hysteria or tears, because by this point the grief had been replaced by something structural, something that held weight. She was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she said, "You've been building a case without knowing you were building a case." I had not thought of it that way. But she was right. Renee had been a domestic advocate for 11 years. She had the specific quality of someone who has heard enough stories that she no longer needs to perform sympathy. She simply provides it, clean and direct, like water from a tap. She did not tell me I was brave. She did not tell me everything would be fine. She told me what I needed to do next, in order, with specifics. And for the first time since that Thursday night in March, I felt something other than alone. She also told me about a journalist at a local outlet who had been building a story about workplace misconduct at Marcus's firm. Not just Cassandra, a pattern, other women, other situations. The same architecture of a man who used his professional position to construct a private life built on other people's silence. When Renee said there were others, I gripped the edge of the table. Not because it surprised me, because it confirmed something I had feared without wanting to name, that I had not been uniquely foolish. I had been systematically deceived by someone practiced at it. That distinction matters more than I can explain to you right now. Because the story Marcus had written about me, and written loudly, and written to everyone, was that I was the problem. That my perception was flawed, my judgment poor, my understanding of money and people and situations fundamentally mistaken. He had spent years building that reputation for me. What Renee handed me, quietly, on a Friday afternoon in late March, was the beginning of a counter-narrative, one grounded in documentation, one that did not require anyone to simply take my word for it. I went home that evening and I made banana pudding. I ate it at the kitchen table while Marcus was at another late meeting. I watched the street from my third-floor window and I thought about what Renee had said. You've been building a case without knowing you were building a case. The tin box was in the closet. The candles on my altar had burned down to their third quarter. Spring was settling firmly into the Charlotte air now. The dogwoods opening along the streets near downtown, and I sat in that apartment and I felt, for the first time in a very long time, that I was not behind. I was exactly where I needed to be. What I needed now was patience. The quiet, absolute patience of a woman who has already decided and is simply waiting for the correct moment to move. I did not have to wait much longer. If you have never had to pretend that everything is fine while knowing everything is not fine, I genuinely do not know how to explain the particular discipline it requires. It is not simply the act of lying. Lying is a single moment, a single word, chosen over another. What I am describing is something more sustained. It is the construction and maintenance of an entirely parallel self, one who moves through a shared domestic space with perfect ordinary ease, while the actual self plans, collects, and prepares. I became very good at it. I had been practicing for years without realizing it. Every time I had suppressed a response to a dismissive comment, every time I had smiled at a dinner party while feeling something completely different underneath. Marcus had trained me, without intending to be helpful, to be an extraordinarily controlled woman. He simply didn't anticipate that I would eventually point that control in a direction he couldn't manage. April, in Charlotte. The mornings soft and cool before the warmth settled in by midday. I woke up every day in that third-floor apartment and performed my half of an ordinary marriage with the precision of someone who had memorized every beat. Coffee at 7. His shirts pressed. Dinner at whatever time he texted to expect him. Yes, in the right places. A question about his day that showed interest without probing. And in the hours he was at the office, I moved. Renee had walked me through what I needed to do, step by step, and I did all of it quietly, without rushing. I went to the bank and opened an account in my name only, not a joint account dressed up as mine, not an account that lived in the shadow of his financial authority, but an account that was exclusively, legally, irreversibly mine. I transferred the emergency cash from the tin box. $680, all of it, moved from that painted Christmas tin into a real account with my name at the top of the statement. It was not a large amount of money. As a first act of financial independence, it was everything. Renee had also helped me understand something I had not fully grasped before, that the $12,000 I pulled from my mother's savings in 2021 was documented, that the pattern of financial control in our marriage was documented. That documentation was the language this process spoke, and I now had years of it. I made copies, not at home, where Marcus might find them. At the library 2 blocks over, where the printer cost 15 cents a page, and no one paid any attention to a woman in a golden mustard sweater feeding papers into a machine. It was at the library, on a Wednesday afternoon, that the close call happened. I was at the copier on the second floor, finishing the last of the financial records, when I heard his voice. Downstairs, near the entrance. Marcus, on his phone, that particular carrying quality his voice had when he was comfortable in a space. My hands went completely still over the papers. I heard him say he would be there in 20 minutes, heard the door, heard the soft library quiet settle back into place. I stood at that machine and counted to 30. Then I finished the copies. Then I put everything into the bottom of my grocery bag, under a box of crackers and a bag of rice, and I walked down the stairs and out the front door without looking left or right. He never saw me. Or if he did, I was just a woman leaving the library with groceries, nothing of note. That evening, I sat at my altar with the candles lit, and I thanked God for the crackers, specifically the crackers, because they were sitting on top of 14 years of documentation, and they made everything look like an errand. Renee was steady through all of this. She called on Tuesdays, never at a time that would seem unusual if Marcus glanced at my phone. She was listed in my contacts as the dry cleaner. She confirmed each step I had completed and gave me the next one. She was the first person in years who spoke to me as though my judgment was reliable. She didn't overpraise or emotionally manage me. She simply treated me like a competent woman with a difficult task to complete. And that treatment, plain and professional, was more restorative than any amount of reassurance could have been. The journalist, whose name was Lila, and who I had one careful phone call with, arranged through Renee, was building her piece slowly, gathering information from multiple directions. I was one thread in a larger fabric. That suited me. I did not want to be a spectacle. I wanted the record to be accurate. There is a difference. And then there was the matter of cooking. It sounds small, and I understand why. But I want to tell you about the Sunday in April when Marcus was out for the afternoon, and I stood in my kitchen and cooked exactly what I wanted, with no consideration of anyone else's preferences. Banana pudding? yes, but also roasted chicken with garlic and lemon, because I had not made that since 2019, when Marcus declared he preferred his chicken differently prepared. Sautéed greens with red pepper flakes, which Marcus called too spicy. Cornbread in a cast-iron skillet, which Marcus thought was too rustic for a proper Sunday dinner. I cooked all of it. I ate at the kitchen table in the afternoon light, with the window open and the Charlotte air coming through, and I felt something shift in my chest that I did not have an immediate word for. It was not defiance. Exactly. It was not revenge. It was the specific sensation of taking up the correct amount of space in my own life. The sensation of a woman who has remembered that her preferences exist and that they are not an inconvenience. That meal was the first true act of liberation in this story. Not the bank account, not the copies at the library, this. The roasted chicken with garlic and lemon, eaten alone in a spring afternoon without apology or explanation to anyone. Everything was in place now. The documents, the account, the ally, the journalist, the record. All I needed was the room. There is a specific kind of satisfaction in setting a trap that the other person cannot see. Not cruelty. I want to be precise about the difference. Cruelty takes pleasure in the other person's pain. What I am describing is something cleaner than that. The satisfaction of a woman who has been told for 14 years that she cannot see clearly, who has been systematically rewritten in the perception of everyone around her, watching the pieces of an accurate record arrange themselves into formation. I was the one arranging them. And no one in that office building on Trade Street in Uptown Charlotte knew it yet. The lawyer's office belonged to a woman named Patricia. Sharp, 50s, the kind of professional competence that announces itself without announcing itself. Renee had referred me. Patricia had reviewed every document I brought her, including the HR envelope from Marcus's firm, and she had used a phrase that I wrote down afterward because I wanted to keep it. "You didn't just survive this," she said. "You built the case." She filed for divorce. She requested the mediation. She asked for the specific meeting format that would include Marcus, his attorney, the mediator, and a court-appointed representative, a formal, official, documented setting where the record would be the loudest voice in the room. Marcus came to that meeting in a suit he owned for impressing people. I had seen him wear it to work dinners, to events where he wanted to be taken seriously, to occasions where his appearance was a kind of argument. He walked into that office the way he had always walked into rooms, with the forward lean of a man who assumed the room would accommodate itself to him. His attorney walked beside him, younger, a leather portfolio under his arm. I was already seated when they arrived. I had arrived 15 minutes early, which Patricia had suggested, because there is authority in already being in a room when someone else enters it. I was wearing the golden mustard sweater. I had thought about that choice deliberately. That sweater belonged to the woman who had stood in the checkout line and seen the truth through a restaurant window. I wanted her in that room with me. Marcus glanced at me when he sat down. A brief assessment. The way he always assessed me, looking for signs of instability, I understood now, so that he could document them for his own internal record, confirm his own narrative. I gave him nothing to read. I held his gaze for 3 seconds, then looked at Patricia. He was not the most important person in that room. I had decided that before I walked in. His attorney opened with a statement about the collaborative nature of the proceedings, the shared history, the desire for resolution. The mediator nodded. Marcus straightened his tie. Here is what Marcus did not know. He did not know that Lila's piece had already been accepted by the outlet. He did not know that the HR investigation at his firm, which had opened 6 weeks prior, had now expanded beyond the initial inquiry. He did not know that the 3 hidden accounts I had found represented a financial pattern that Patricia's review described as deliberate concealment of marital assets. He did not know that I had copies of everything, organized, dated, corroborated. He did not know that the room he had walked into to win was already won. I watched him across that mahogany table, and I thought about the Jaguar. The Jaguar XJ in classic black. I had seen it parked outside Cassandra's building on a Thursday afternoon when Renee had suggested I drive past just to confirm one piece of the record. Marcus had been driving our second car, the modest one, the practical one, the one appropriate to the household income he discussed with me. The Jaguar had been paid for in a way that would become very clear once the financial disclosure documents were filed. His wealth had been a private project. My poverty in that marriage had been a management decision. I thought about the retirement village with the pool and social events. The one I had found online during a Tuesday afternoon when Marcus was at the office and I was supposed to be doing laundry. The one that costs what it costs and is worth every cent. I had not booked anything yet. I was not superstitious enough to count on outcomes before they were secured. But I had looked at the photographs, the pool in the afternoon light, the people in the common room, easy with each other, unburdened. That is what I was building toward. Not Marcus's downfall. That was not mine to build. What I was building was the room I would walk into after all of this was over. The space I would occupy without apology or explanation to anyone. The mediator asked if everyone was ready to proceed. Patricia said yes. I placed the documents on the table, and the trap that had taken 6 weeks to set began to close. I want to be very precise about this moment because it deserves precision. The printed transcript of the voice memo went on the table first. 47 seconds, formatted onto a single page with the timestamp and the sender and the recipient clearly identified. His name sending it, my name receiving it. His words in 12-point Times New Roman. She still doesn't know anything. She never does. Then the financial records, then the documentation of the 3 hidden accounts. Then the timeline of concealed marital assets going back to 2018. Then the affidavit from Patricia's office detailing the $12,000 pulled from my mother's savings account in 2021 and the circumstances under which that transfer occurred. Then, last, the HR affidavit from Marcus's firm, which described a pattern of conduct that included Cassandra and 2 other women over 4 years, and which had been under institutional review for 6 weeks. I placed each document on the table the way you place cards during a card game. Deliberately. Without hurry. With the absolute composure of a woman who has already decided that composure is her most powerful asset in this room. Marcus's attorney leaned forward at the financial records. Marcus himself looked at the voice memo transcript for a long time. A long time. I watched his face move through a sequence of responses, the initial scanning expression, the pause, the recalibration. He reached for his water glass and drank. He set it back down. He did not look at me. Then I spoke. "You told her I never know anything," I said. My voice was level. It was not icy. I want to be clear about that, because I think there is a common expectation that a woman in this moment is either crying or cold, and I was neither. I was simply present, entirely, unambiguously present. I know everything. The mediator wrote something down. Marcus said, "That's," and stopped. I said, "Don't." He stopped. Some moments exist outside of normal time. That room existed outside of normal time for a few seconds after I said, "Don't." Because for 14 years, the word that had occupied that space in every conversation was yes. Yes, I must have misremembered. Yes, perhaps I'm being oversensitive. Yes, you're probably right. The word "don't" in that room, in my voice, at that volume and with that finality, was the first audible evidence that those 14 years had ended. His attorney whispered to him, Marcus straightened his tie. He had straightened his tie 4 times since sitting down. I had counted. Not because the counting mattered, but because counting is what I do when I am managing an environment. And I had been managing this environment since I arrived 15 minutes early and sat down in a room he expected to control. What I want to say to you right now, directly to you, is this. The confrontation did not feel like victory in the moment. It felt like accuracy, like finally speaking in a language the room could hear. For years I had been told that my version of events was not credible, that my perception was not trustworthy, that the woman Marcus had described to our neighbors and co-workers and my own sister was the real account, and my lived experience was a deviation from it. In that lawyer's office on Trade Street in Charlotte on a Tuesday morning in April, the documents on the table made my experience the official record. That is not revenge. That is correction. The mediator asked Marcus's attorney whether his client wished to respond to the financial disclosure documentation. The attorney said they would need time to review. Patricia said the timeline was established in the filing and was not subject to extension. Her voice carried the particular flatness of a woman who has heard that request many times and has a standard answer for it. I looked at Marcus. I want to tell you what I saw, because I had spent 14 years looking at his face and learning to read it in the specific way you learn to read weather, looking for the signs that told me which version of the day was coming. What I saw in that moment was not the anger I had feared, not the patient condescension I had lived inside of for so long. What I saw was a man who had built a very large structure on the assumption that a specific woman would never stop doubting herself, and was now sitting across from that specific woman who had stopped. The structure was visible. The seams were visible. The whole apparatus of certainty he had walked in wearing was visible in a way that it had never been before, and we both knew it. You spent 14 years telling everyone around me that I was the problem, I said. You were very thorough. I'll give you that. I looked at the documents on the table, then back at him. So was I. The reputational damage he had spent years building against me. The unstable wife, the difficult woman, the one who couldn't manage money or manage herself, had nowhere to land in that room because the room was full of paper. Paper is not emotional. Paper does not misremember. Paper does not soften its position when challenged with enough confidence and sustained calm. Marcus looked at the documents one more time. Then he looked away from the table entirely, at some middle point between himself and the window, and I understood that he was doing what he had always done, looking for the version of events that made the most sense for him. He was not going to find it in that room. He was not going to find it anywhere, because this time I had been more thorough. Some things you spend years losing. And then one Tuesday morning in April, in a formal room with a mahogany table and a mediator taking notes, you get them back, not restored to what they were before, but remade into something you actually understand the value of. Your own name, your own judgment, your own certainty that what you saw through that restaurant window was exactly what you saw. The weeks after that meeting unfolded in a particular kind of quiet, not the quiet of suppression. I had lived inside that quiet for 14 years, and I knew its texture intimately. This was a different quality entirely. It was the quiet of something finished, of a room where all the furniture has finally been moved to its correct position. An organizing quiet, not a holding your breath quiet. Marcus lost his senior position at the firm 3 weeks after the mediation. The HR investigation had expanded, and the findings were significant enough that the firm did not offer him the choice of quiet departure. It was a termination with documentation. His securities license was placed under review by the state financial regulatory body, which was a process Lila's article, published the second week of April, 11 days after the mediation, had certainly accelerated. I did not read the article the day it ran. I read it on a Thursday morning, with coffee, at my kitchen table, and I read it the way you read something you already know, checking for accuracy rather than surprise. The relationship with Cassandra, it turned out, had created problems that extended in directions Marcus had not fully managed. Her uncle, his supervisor, had known about the raise, had not known about the rest. That distinction mattered enormously in the institutional response. Marcus's professional reputation, the very weapon he had used against me so carefully, so systematically for so long, had turned in his hands. The man who had spent years telling everyone that his wife was unstable, difficult, bad with money, was now the subject of a documented institutional record that described something rather different. I felt nothing dramatic about this. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think the expectation is that justice delivers catharsis, a clean, satisfying wave of emotion that washes the past clean. What I actually felt was more like setting down something heavy. Not triumph. Not relief, exactly. The quiet recognition that a wrong thing had been correctly identified and that identification had consequences, as correct identifications sometimes do. Renee called me the Thursday after the article ran. She asked how I was doing, and I told her I was doing quietly. She laughed at that, not at me, but with me, the specific laugh of someone who understood exactly what quietly meant and thought it was exactly the right word. She asked if I had thought more about next steps, about housing, about what I wanted the next chapter to look like. I had thought about almost nothing else. The apartment on the 3rd floor, the one with the view of the street, the mixed-income neighborhood near downtown, the walls that had held 14 years of managed reality and quiet erasure, was no longer somewhere I needed to be. The lease was in both our names. Patricia had navigated that with the efficiency she brought to every element of this process. I was free to go. The tin box was in the closet, empty. I had moved all the money to my account months ago, but I took the box with me when I left that apartment, packed in a bag with the prayer cards from my altar and 2 photographs and the cast-iron skillet that had made the cornbread. I did not take it because it represented pain. I took it because it represented the truth about myself that had survived everything, that even when I had been reduced to hiding $20 bills behind winter coats, some part of me had kept going, had known that going was the right direction, had folded bills and waited and believed that the tin box was worth maintaining even when everything else felt uncertain. That kind of quiet belief is not naivety. It is infrastructure. I want to tell you about the Sunday I moved into my new place. Not the retirement village yet, not quite, but a quiet apartment in a neighborhood south of downtown, a ground-floor unit with a patio and a garden bed I intend to fill with marigolds. Renee came and helped me carry boxes. We ate banana pudding out of plastic cups while sitting on the floor because the table wasn't assembled yet. And we talked about everything and nothing the way women talk when they have stopped performing and are simply being. The tin box went on the windowsill in the kitchen, not hidden, not in a closet, on the sill where the morning light could find it. Empty now, but not hollow. There is a difference. The box had done its job. What it represented had been transferred to something more permanent. I am saving for the retirement village, the one with the pool and social events. I have seen the photographs and I have done the math. My math, accurate and my own. And it is achievable on the timeline I have built. I intend to arrive there in a Jaguar XJ in classic black. I have not purchased it yet. That is fine. I have time and I have patience, and I understand now that patience deployed in the right direction is not weakness. It is the most effective tool a clear-eyed woman has. Renee and I have coffee on the 2nd Saturday of every month, not because she is still my advocate, that phase is complete, but because what grew from that professional relationship turned out to be an actual friendship, the kind built on the specific intimacy of having been honest with each other during difficult circumstances. She does not ask for anything from me. I do not manage or suppress my preferences in her presence. That is what friendship without an ulterior structure feels like. And at 41, I am learning to recognize it. Spring in Charlotte has continued to deepen. The azaleas have given way to the fuller greens of May, and the light through my new kitchen window is warm and unhurried. I make what I want. I watch my soap operas without guilt or interruption. I cook roasted chicken with garlic and lemon on Sundays and eat it in the afternoon light with the patio door open, and the air that comes through smells like everything that is still possible. The tin box on the windowsill catches the light in the morning and holds it for a moment. Then the light moves on. So do I. Several months have passed now. I want to give you an honest account of what that time actually looks like, without the shape that hindsight can impose on it, the clean narrative arc, the before and after that stories sometimes manufacture to make the ending feel tidier than it is. The honest account is this: some mornings are easier than others. The legal process moved at the pace legal processes move, slowly, with paperwork, with delays and revisions and moments where I had to sign my name to something painful for the 14th time and simply keep going. The financial disclosure revealed a net worth significantly larger than anything Marcus had ever discussed with me, which confirmed what I had suspected, but still landed with the specific weight of documented confirmation. The income and wealth he had been accumulating had been a private project. My financial ignorance in that marriage had been a managed condition, not a personal failing. Let me say that again because it matters. My financial ignorance was a managed condition. It was manufactured. It was the result of years of deliberate exclusion from information, decision-making, and access, dressed up as protection, framed as efficiency, executed as control. When I finally held those disclosure documents and saw the full scope of what had existed beside me while I was folding $20 bills into a tin box, the dollars that represented hundreds of thousands in concealed assets, I was not humiliated. I was clarified. The reputational damage he had done to my relationship with my sister Diane, to our neighbors, to people in his professional circle, did not reverse cleanly. That is the honest truth about character assassination. The article helped. The institutional findings helped. But some people had already built a version of me in their minds that was difficult to restructure, and I had to accept that the work of rebuilding my reputation was mine to do, slowly and by presence, and that some people would simply never update their version. That is the cost of this kind of betrayal, and I will not pretend otherwise. What I will tell you is that Diane called me in May. We talked for 2 hours. We cried some. We ate banana pudding through the phone, separately, on either end of the call, which sounds absurd, and was in fact one of the best meals I have had in years. She had known something was wrong for a long time. She had not known how to reach through the wall Marcus had built around me to say so. Isolation is effective precisely because it makes itself invisible, to the person inside it and to the people on the outside who might otherwise help. That brings me to what I most want you to take from this story, because I believe this is the part that matters beyond my own specific situation. Isolation as a tactic is real. It is deliberate. And it is the foundation on which every other form of control is built. When someone in your life slowly limits your access to the people who know you, your sister, your friends, the colleagues who remember you before this relationship, they are not being protective. They are not managing social complexity. They are removing the mirrors that would reflect an accurate image of your situation back to you. They are building a room with no exits and making the construction process feel like care. The warning signs are quiet and gradual by design, a gathering that becomes complicated to attend, a friendship that drifts because every time you try to maintain it, something in the household requires you, a family member who slowly receives a version of you that you would not recognize. Each sign alone is nothing. Together, they are architecture. I did not report what happened to me for a very long time. I did not name it, which meant I could not report it even to myself. Studies show that only 1 in 12 cases of psychological abuse is reported, which means that for every woman who picks up the phone and calls a Renee or a Patricia or a crisis line, 11 others are still sitting in that apartment, questioning whether what they saw through the restaurant window was what they saw. And if psychological abuse is underreported, neglect within intimate relationships is almost entirely invisible to official record. Studies indicate that only 1 in 57 cases of neglect is reported, making it the least reported form of harm we experience. 1 in 57. Think about what that number means. Think about how many women are counting what they gave against what they received and arriving at the same unbalanced answer and saying nothing, because no one has told them that the math they are doing is documentation. The math you are doing is documentation. Write it down. Date it. Keep copies somewhere they cannot find. This is the one concrete piece of advice I can offer anyone who recognizes something in what I have described. If you have a tin box, keep it. If you do not have a tin box, start one. Not only in the financial sense, though that matters and I will not minimize it, but in every sense. Build the small, private archive of yourself that exists independent of their version of you. Your certainty, your memories, your receipts. These are not paranoia. They are the infrastructure of a woman who knows that clarity, when it comes, will need something to stand on. I am 41 years old. My name is my own. My money is in an account with only my name on it. The tin box is on the windowsill in the morning light, empty and present and completely at peace with what it is. I am saving for a retirement village with a pool and social events, and I intend to arrive there in a Jaguar XJ in classic black. Classic, not flashy, because that is not about performance. That is about knowing exactly what you are worth and arriving accordingly. I am making exactly what I want for dinner tonight. I will watch my soap operas without interruption. I lit the candles on my altar this morning, and I did not ask for patience. I have learned to trust the patience I already have. I asked instead for continued clarity and for the grace to give it to someone else when they need it. The way Renee gave it to me, plain and direct, without making it a performance. Now I want to hear from you. Where are you listening to this from? Tell me in the comments. Your city, your state, whatever you're comfortable sharing. This story is not unique to Charlotte, North Carolina, and I think we both know it. What would you have done? If you had been standing in that checkout line, looking through that restaurant window, what would your first move have been? There is no wrong answer. I genuinely want to know. If something in this story landed somewhere true for you, if you recognized a room, a gesture, a phrase, a feeling, hit like, not for the numbers, because it is a way of saying you were here and you heard it and you know. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe. There are more of us than the statistics account for, and every story that gets told is one more mirror in a room that someone needed to find. You didn't misread it. The hand was exactly where you saw it.